Hey, welcome today to an episode of Surviving Toxic Relationships. Today, we're continuing a conversation that has been central to what we've written and lived: boundaries. Not walls, not control, but understanding. Because boundaries aren't about pushing people away, they're about protecting what God has entrusted to us: our peace, our values, and our emotional health.
So, welcome to Love with Eyes Wide Open podcast series. This is a space for faith-centered conversations about love, discernment, and truth based on our books, Love with Eyes Wide Open, Teaching Our Daughters to Recognize Red Flags, and God's Voice in Relationships is already released. You can right now find it on Amazon, and soon we'll have it in other platforms as well. And our soon-to-be released book, with the Love with Eyes Wide Open, When Something Feels Wrong, a faith-based guide to discernment and understanding toxic relationship patterns, where we learn to recognize what brings peace, listen for God's voice, and choose relationships that honor both the heart and the spirit. We are so glad you are here today, and thank you for taking the time to listen. So first, one of the things that we talked about last week, we talked about discernment. And discernment and boundaries are very intertwined in their own way. Discernment is definitely more of a faith-based, I think, term. Discernment is definitely observation over a long period of time. It's the sensitivity of the spirit. Discernment is really critical to help us keep ourselves from going in a situation that could be very harmful emotionally, possibly physically as well. But then you have boundaries, which is, like I said, very interconnected, is more of an act of caring versus conflict. So many women do misunderstand that. They think boundaries mean conflict because we say, well, I need to put my boundaries up. I think we hear that a lot of time in a very negative connotation, even though it's supposed to be a positive connotation. And today, like I hear it a lot, like in social media or kids like say, I'm not talking to my parents again because I need to have my boundaries. But it's always given that vibe of a negativity. Or as a Christian, it seems like we're cutting people off. But remember, walls build division between you and relationships. Boundaries kind of help build relationships, and it's very important as we grow. So one of the books, the one that recently was released, the one teaching our daughters to recognize red flags and God's voice in relationships, there are 4 things in here that talk about boundaries. Now, both of our books will talk about boundaries because they're so critical in our mental and emotional and sometimes our physical well-being to protect ourselves from getting in situations. One is boundaries come from faith, walls come from fear. A wall says, I'll never let anyone in. I don't know how many of us have probably said that. I'm never going to let anybody hurt me again. But a boundary says, I'll invite people in with wisdom. Boundaries are built from peace. Walls are built from panic. So if you said, I've never letting anybody in, I know that's a lot of our ways of just trying to say, I never can handle this pain again. So there is a bit of a panic there. 2, boundaries invite accountability. Walls isolate. Walls block everyone, even the ones God sent for community. Boundaries make room for growth and honest conversations. Number 3, boundaries give voice strength. Walls silence it. A wall hides because it fears being misunderstood. A boundary speaks the truth in love because it honors honesty. And finally, number 4, boundaries protect healing. Walls prevent it, which I could say at one point, I didn't realize that. So walls keep the light out. Boundaries let God's light in to reveal what's still being healed. So those are just kind of some things to think about as we process through this conversation and move forward to a better understanding of boundaries in each of our lives and how we can build better relationships because of them and not because we're trying to control others or control a situation. We're trying to protect our hearts is what we're trying to do. Deana.
Yes.
Go ahead and tell me what your thoughts were moving on the next topic.
Okay, well, so in light of what you said, Lizzie, boundaries, the reason that we say boundaries reflect caring is because you cannot have a healthy relationship in any way, shape, or form without boundaries. And I know you and I talked about this, Lizzie, about how when we were young, we didn't know that boundaries was a good thing. We didn't even know the word really, but being a good faith-based person or Christian person meant that you were always nice and you were always kind and you did whatever it took to make sure other people were happy. And that's what love meant. But think about boundaries is like the law of the world. If we didn't have a highway with a dotted line in the middle, or stoplights or freeway signs, we would have chaos. We would have accidents. We would have many, many, many dead people. And that's just the truth, because you have to have order. You can't live in chaos. So boundaries can feel hard when you're a people pleaser, which is what I definitely was. I did not know how to not be a people pleaser. And I certainly would have never put my foot down and said, look, I'm uncomfortable with this and I don't want to be part of it, or I don't appreciate you treating me that way. Oh, I would have never said anything like that to anybody. As a matter of fact, usually I was the one apologizing, because it seemed like even if the other person was mad about something that I didn't even know that I did, I couldn't sleep that night because they were upset with me. And so them being upset with me became the basis of my reactions, not what was right or wrong, not what made sense, and not looking at who's in my circle and if they were really giving back and they really cared about me. So a lot of us were taught that kindness means always being available, but constant availability without really discerning the situation, it leads us to be resentful and it takes away from our relationship. So it's even kind of more toxic to not have boundaries, because then after a while, you get irritated and angry that this person's taking advantage of you. What do you think about that, Lizzie?
Most definitely. I think, Deana, you and I have both discussed that we're both people pleasers, and it does puts us in those situations that we think our kindness is the right way to be because we want to make sure everybody's taken care of. And I'm sorry when we weren't the one that really did the deed that harmed the relationship. So I think in that aspect, it's pretty remarkable that I had to learn in my 40s what boundaries were.
Well, so tell me about that. Tell me about your first relationship where it would have been a wonderful thing for you, even for your mental health and your emotional health and you as a person, to set boundaries in that relationship. Talk
Yeah,
about that.
Yeah, no, when I was married to my first husband, it was definitely a lot of spiritual manipulation, spiritual control, religious abuse for sure. And that is when we've talked about that it becomes really convoluted of what really is God's word versus what is being manipulated and twisted. And so I had no idea what a boundary was because I didn't all I wanted to do was be a daughter that was pleasing to the Lord and be obedient and be submissive and follow everything that I felt was his desire in my life because we always focused on submission. So boundaries was never in my forefront of my thoughts. So I think I was probably divorced for a while before I sat through my first thing on boundaries. And how did we not learn that sooner is beyond me because I don't remember it talking about it in church. So if I never had that planting of seeds of this is what a boundary is, this is how to protect yourself, this blah blah blah, I probably would have been in a whole different situation because in my second relationship, which is Deana and I's shared ex, like it was pretty much one and done for me, or well, maybe two and done. Said this is the way it is. You ever do this again, I'm out. And I was. So it was much different, but I was a different person. And I know Deana, your experience was a lot different as well with our ex Rex. What would you share about that one?
Oh my goodness, yes. And just like you said, Lizzie, I had no idea what boundaries were. Again, you're taught to just do the right thing and love everybody, and you're not taught to protect yourselves for people you love. But even Jesus had boundaries. Like, he didn't heal everybody. He withdrew from the crowds, and went and had quiet. Like, he didn't like do everything for everybody. And some people say, well, why? But he actually put boundaries around himself and his own time to go and refill his cup with his Father. And the Bible had boundaries all over it because God created the commandments. He created laws. They were to protect us. I mean, think about it. Look at the 10 Commandments. That's to keep chaos and disorder and crazy human behavior out of the world and to give us internal laws on how to behave. But that also applies to the way people treat you. But when I was married, and I got married very, very young, I finally learned to set boundaries a few years in when I realized that my ex had a sexual addiction. and he would go on these exploits and, strip clubs and things like that. And of course, I'm dumbfounded. I have no idea what to even think about this. I'm so young and so naive. And I would finally set a boundary. And my boundary was, if you do this again, I will leave. This is not okay. You're in church on Sunday, you're worshiping God, talking Bible talk, and then I catch you out doing this. I couldn't reconcile it. And so I would put down boundaries. And then, I would pack up. I would actually give a boundary and I would follow through, which is the definition of a boundary, really. You set a boundary and you follow through with what you say you're going to do. But what happened was he would do everything he could to get me back, and many, many, many emotionally manipulative things to get me back. And so I would come back. And what that meant was my boundary wasn't fully anchored yet, which with trauma bonding, and you have children and you love that person and you really believe in God, it's common. But I kept setting these boundaries over and over again. And in 27 years of marriage, I left 9 times. And so a boundary really only becomes real when it's predictable and sustained. But that doesn't mean you beat yourself up or say that you failed. It just means that you're just not ready, probably, to follow through. You may not have the strength, or you just may have so much confusion and fog that you really don't know what the right thing to do is, especially if you're getting competing information from friends, family, spiritual leaders, even therapists. You're getting all this competing information about how, this could be a good person and good relationship, and they just have problems. And you want to give it all you can if you love that person. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with loving your family. There's nothing wrong with anything. But let's think about this. What did that communicate to him? That I would leave and then go back after several months? Consciously or subconsciously, I'm thinking he was like, okay, well, she might leave, but she always comes back, which reduces the seriousness of my setting a boundary. I mean, I set a boundary multiple times and never ultimately left. So that also kind of gave the message that his behavior was survivable. Yeah, I would leave, but I think he got real comfortable that I would never really leave for good and it wouldn't really cost him anything. So it's just like with your child. If you set a boundary with your child and say, listen, if you do this, this is going to be the consequence, which children need. They desperately need that because real life has consequences. If they violate a natural law, whatever that might be, they are going to experience consequences. If they mouth off to their boss in their first job, they're probably going to get let go. That money's not coming anymore. So extremely important for anybody to understand that consequences will occur, but don't think you have to be perfect at it, please. Like, boundaries are something that really they feel weird and awkward and strange at first. You may not even quite know, but sometimes setting a little tiny one is the best way to start. And that could be as little as, I don't like that you talk to me in that tone. It's very hurtful. The kids hear it. It disrupts our family peace in the home. I want you to control your tone with me. Or here would be your boundary, or I will walk out of the house. Or the kids and I will go get ice cream if you're going to walk in and be this way to us. Little tiny, tiny things that you could do. Obviously, disclaimer, Lizzie and I always say this disclaimer. If you're with someone who's highly volatile or highly unpredictable, be very careful with your boundaries. Seek therapist advice before setting any boundaries so that you make sure that you are not setting this person on edge against you. Because when somebody who is highly controlling starts to realize that they're losing control and you're taking back your own agency and your independence, they can start to really get crazy. If you're with somebody like that, get professional help, okay?
And I would like to say, if it's okay for me to interject here, if you are with somebody like that, this is when I really encourage people to put together an exit plan. Does it mean that you have to follow through with that exit plan? No, but it is so important that your boundary is actually making sure that you and your children are going to be okay and you're going to always be safe. And trust me, Deana and I have both been here. We've observed many other women in these situations. And when they're that volatile, your boundary may need to be a silent one of planning your exit and preparing yourself for a future of a healthy lifestyle. Yeah.
Well said, Lizzie. And honestly, Lizzie and I know like our shared ex went bonkers when we left. And I mean, that could look like anything from crying and begging and pleading that you come back to showing up at your workplace and begging you to come back to threatening suicide and being extremely dramatic about it, like literally making you think they were going to kill themselves. What else am I missing that?
Well, I think I think what happens with victims in these situations, because we haven't been able to understand what our boundaries were, is that we feel the guilt and shame. So we put it on ourselves as well, because we are people pleasers, because or we're women of faith that really have this strong tie to the marriage covenant. Yeah, it should be taken care seriously. But the marriage covenant is kind of null and void if you're the only one putting in the work. It's a two-sided relationship. It's both of you. As my mom would say, if one would do 100% and the other person's having a 90%, you just it's working together. And so your boundary for yourself is, do not let yourself feel guilt or shame for having to do the tough situation. Whether it's a verbal boundary that you are laying down of, don't talk to me like this is not acceptable, or a physical silent one that you're going to have to do and to leave the relationship. And at that point, you also need to have a boundary before you leave the relationship inwardly, what needs to take place and for how long before this relationship can be mended. Because that's the key too. Just like discernment, everything is observations over time. That's like a person, when we have to change patterns of behavior, you need to have evidence over time. You need to be able to give that freely. If someone truly loved you, they're going to want to do that and to please you, and they're going to be okay with that healthy boundary that you're putting down. And I'm telling you, it's not easy. I've done it twice, and I left my first husband 5 times. But anyway, it's hard to do the right thing, but what happens is, like Deana said with her and Rex, she would go back without like a date of, hey, this is not acceptable, and then love bombing whatever, she comes back. So your definitions of what that needs to look like needs to be very clear, just like any other boundary. It's just going to look different for whatever you decide to do or need to do, especially if it has to deal with safety.
Exactly. We can't emphasize that enough. That's why we love Dr. David Clark. He has excellent information about the exit plan and how that needs to be done if you are in a highly volatile relationship, or even one that you suspect could be volatile. Because sometimes you think you're in a relationship and it's not that bad, but boy, I tell you, it's because you've been rolling out the red carpet for them your entire relationship. You don't oppose them. But once you do, that's when the teeth come out, and that's when can get really scary if you're with someone who's highly toxic and highly controlling. So that's when, follow Dr. David Clark and get that quiet, silent exit plan. Yes. All right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Good one.
Okay. So moving along here. So what would a boundary sound like in real life? I mean, I already gave a couple examples, but what are some things maybe, Lizzie, that you set in real life that, worked out for you? And it doesn't have to be in your marriages. It could be at work or with a friend or.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much. I was trying to think of one that might have happened recently. I think there was someone close to me. They said something they shouldn't have in a way that it shouldn't have been said. And this happened probably 3-4 months ago. And I said, if you ever do that again, or this relationship is done. It wasn't a partner. It was another type of relationship. And we talked about it, and it has not happened again. And I know for me, I would need to follow through with that, because verbal abuse is not acceptable, whether it's from a friend, your child, definitely not a partner that should protect you, parents. It's just should never be accepted. And I think sometimes as believers, we say, well, we'll just love them to Jesus, or maybe they just had a bad day. You know what? I get that. But the older I get, it's worn on me a little bit. You do, I think the goal is not to get to the place where you've been so broken. You're like, nothing's going to happen now because I'm just going to be this huge fortress. And remember, boundaries are not barriers, they're the gates of discernment. So embrace that as you're going through anything on a daily basis, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, especially with an intimate partner. It's very critical. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
and along with what you said, I think that when you have healthy boundaries, you're going to land right in the middle because you could either be so permissive that anybody can do anything to you and basically get away with it and you'll
Yeah.
still be their friend. But then you can swing the opposite pendulum where now you're done. Like you've had it, right? We've all been there. You are like, absolutely not. Nobody is going to do this to me ever again. I am done. But then you can actually become a brick wall that nobody gets to get in. And you don't want to go to that extreme either. Both of them are very unhealthy extremes. You have to be able to let the sunshine in, but find your agency. Who are you? What's important to you? And what matters? It might be that your partner or your friend or your boss tell you you're overreacting. That's ridiculous. That's unreasonable. But that's really unfair because if it bothers you and you're having a hard time with their behaviors, you need to set boundaries. You need to have the conversation. It could be that you're in a stage of your life where you're overreacting to everything. It could be. But look at that. Really look at that. Ask people that you trust, ask people that you love. Do you think I'm the type that overreacts to things? Whatever the issue is, figure it out, get help figuring it out from people who really know you and love you, but don't go to either extreme. That's the most important part because that's not boundaries. Blocking everybody out and saying nobody will ever hurt me again, I will never be in another relationship is not the definition of boundaries. And boundaries is that healthy place that you want to be.
So well said, Deana. Wow. Yeah, I was about to say, I don't think there's anything else at this point. I think that was
No, but we can ask some questions just for thoughtfulness, right? For them
yeah,
to think about. Okay.
reflective.
Yeah, reflective questions. Like what boundary could I work on this week that maybe would bring me some calm? What could I do to maybe start a boundary, maybe set a boundary? Maybe there's a little tiny thing that's been bothering you that you could set a boundary and you can be nice about it. If you're one of those super nice people, be nice about it. You don't have to be a jerk. Like there's no need for that usually. If you are having to be a jerk all the time, then you're probably in a really toxic relationship. So that's one question. And the other one would be, where do I feel stretched thin right now? Sometimes we are overreacting and needing peace and needing the chaos to stop, not because our boundaries stink, but because we are just so stretched thin. Like life is pounding us from every side and we just don't have the bandwidth to deal with almost anything. So 2 good questions to think about.
Those are great reflection questions. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Next week, we'll talk about unlearning lies about love and how sometimes scripture is being misapplied. I'm not saying that it's always on purpose. Sometimes it's just a quiet, subtle thing, but when you're in these situations, it can have a huge impact. But please follow Surviving Toxic Relationships for more conversations on discernment, emotional health, and Christ-centered growth. As we close today's conversation, we hope this reminded you that discernment helps you recognize what is true, and boundaries help you protect the peace that follows. Neither is about becoming guarded or distant. They're about walking with clarity, wisdom, and steady confidence in your relationships. If this episode encouraged you, share it with a friend or a mother who may be learning how to lead with both grace and strength. And if you're wanting to go deeper into these conversations, you can find more from us through Surviving Toxic Relationships and our book, Love with Eyes Wide Open series. Thank you for spending this time with us. Wherever you are today, may you walk forward with peace, calm, and the courage to honor what brings deep peace into your life. Thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful day.